Greetings to all of you who have joined us online for our webinar today. We're going to wait just about 1 minute here. I see we've got some folks still signing on, so we're going to give them just a second here to get on there, and then we will start our webinar. But again, thank you for being with us this afternoon. It's been one of those mornings, Nathan. It's just the morning ran into the afternoon, and nobody knew the difference.
It's the way it's happening here. I just got back from vacation, and the day is. So I preached today for a teacher's in service. I'll preach tomorrow for a funeral, and I got the weekend coming up. Nothing like easing my way back in after vacation.
Right. One of the biggest downfalls of taking vacation is coming back from vacation, because it's always twice as hard as before you left.
And I'm not going to turn the camera around to show you what my desk looks like either.
That's probably good. No panoramic view here today.
Negative.
Okay, I think we're all on, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again for joining us today as we are talking about leading churches with schools, and we're so glad to have Reverend Dr. Nathan Meador with us, senior pastor at St. John in Plymouth, Wisconsin, and assistant coordinator of O&M Stewardship, and all-around great guy. And we're glad to have Nathan with us today and talking about leading churches with schools. Just a couple of notes as Pastor Meador is going through our presentation. If you have any questions, up on the left-hand side, there's a little arrow. You can click on that arrow, and there's a little attendee chat feature. Go ahead and type your questions in the attendee chat feature, or if you go on the top bar, there's also an additional settings, view audience questions. You can put your audience questions there too, and at the end of our webinar, we will have a Q&A session to try to get all of your questions answered. Other than that, also, when we get to the end of the webinar, you'll have a link will be sent to you to fill out an evaluation of our webinar today, as well as a link to download this presentation. So you can also download the PowerPoint, as well as in the future, you'll be able to get the archive version that will be put up on our website. So without any further ado, let's begin with a word of prayer. Gracious Lord, our Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for this day and for the opportunity to serve you in so many and varied ways. And we give you thanks for the opportunity you give us to minister to so many through Lutheran schools. We pray, O Lord, that your blessing be upon our webinar today as we talk about leading and guiding those schools along, that it might carry out the ministry that you have intended for it. We give you thanks for Pastor Meador and his ministry and his wisdom today. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Take it away, Nathan.
All right. Glad to have you all with us today. And Andy Smith, I see you're on the conversation as well. So you're not allowed to tell any stories from media services in St. Louis. It is good to be with you. Just a little bit about me. This is my 22nd year in the parish, 22 and a half almost. I've served congregations in North Wisconsin, Southern Illinois, and South Wisconsin, all congregations of various sizes. In North Wisconsin, I served a dual parish. I served a rural single-point parish. And then for the last 15 years, both at Zion Lutheran Church in Staunton, Illinois, and here at St. John in South Wisconsin and Plymouth, Wisconsin, I've had the opportunity to serve as a senior pastor with a school ministry. It's full of its joys, and as we'll go through, it's also full of its challenges. But that being said, there are some solutions, I believe, to these challenges that we need to be able to look at. As Todd pointed out, since July of 2013, I have been assistant coordinator for stewardship with the Office of National Missions. When Bart Day was the executive director for Office of National Mission, he brought Heath Curtis and I on to balance both administrative synod service as well as keeping one foot in the parish. I lost the toss, and I was assistant. Heath Curtis is the actual coordinator, the leader, but that means I don't have to go to any of the staff meetings. So my connection to a Lutheran school is also familial. I'm married to a Lutheran educator. My wife Jill is a much better teacher than I am as a pastor. She teaches one of those rare birds that teaches middle school and loves teaching middle school. She's at Trinity Lutheran in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, and we have 3 children. My oldest is Joseph. He is student teaching this fall in the area of secondary or K-12 instrumental and choral music. So if you know of anybody who has a position for an instrumental or choral person in, say, January of 2019, send me a private message. My daughter Bethany, we will move her to Concordia University on Sunday in the physical therapy program. And then my youngest Andrew, he's 15, and he's just trying to stay alive to be 16. Although, unless of course we're talking about golf or basketball. All right, so that's who I am. This is one of these things that I deal with on an almost daily basis, just struggling with, but also then rejoicing in the great opportunity that we have in Lutheran education. You look at the world around you. In fact, I preached today for an in-service for the Lutheran educators for the Sheboygan County area, and we were looking at Psalm 46, and you see the wonderful imagery that the psalmist uses about the kingdoms plotting and things tottering and falling. There's all kinds of hopelessness in the world in which we live. And we have an opportunity, both as in primarily in our gospel ministry, but especially in the gospel ministry that is executed through Lutheran education. We have a wonderful opportunity, and it all comes down to that question: if we don't, who will? If we don't, who will? And that is, if we are not as ambassadors for the gospel of Jesus Christ, if we are not out front in every aspect, including educational ministry, where is this message going to come through? Because we live in a world that is decaying. We get daily tweets. We get we get people who unfriend or almost come to blows on a daily basis. There's been a decline in the civility in our conversation. There's decline in the morality of our communities, and we've even lost common courtesy. You see this in every aspect, whether it's on Facebook, which is just this nether region for, good intentions go there to die. But even in the store, I saw a meme the other day that says, I even have road rage in my shop when I have my shopping cart. You see this in construction areas and all this. There's just this decline in everything that we as a people once embraced. But that's secondary, because we see a lot of that results from the devastation of the family. And we're talking on the macro level of the redefinition of marriage and family and gender fluidity and all that other stuff. But again, as you drill down deeper, what you start to see is that redefinition of family and marriage that comes from the fact that we haven't taken care of marriage. The statistics on the rate of divorce, even amongst our own families. People who are otherwise active in the parish, we are almost non-distinguishable from the communities we serve, and that's not, that's a reality that that maybe we didn't fully embrace 30, 40, 50 years ago. And there's just this common level of dysfunction. I'm thinking of one of our classrooms here in Plymouth. And it's not an accident that one of our most challenging classrooms also has 75, I believe it's about 75% presence of some sort of family dysfunction in the class, whether it's a divorce, substance abuse, never married parents. And so we have all of this morass in our society. And we have this wonderful opportunity because we get to bring the gospel to bear in that setting. And we know from what we believe, teach, and confess that this is the ultimate solution, is confession, absolution, the new life to which we are called in Christ. Now, This is not a great opportunity for us to create an on-earth utopia. That's not what we're talking about, because we understand the world in which we live will continue to decay until Christ indeed comes back. Excuse me. But we have the opportunity on an individual basis, on a family by family basis, to bring this word of life, this word of hope. And that's a big thing. And this is not a new opportunity. This is not a new condition either. This is what Walther said. Concern for the future of their children in both church and school was the most compelling reason for emigration to America. And another of the Saxon immigrants noted, to be sure, the principal reason for the emigration was to ensure Christian schooling for our children. As we understand, Christian education has always played a part as a foil or an antidote to false teaching, false conduct, and some of these other things. Amy, I lost my PowerPoint. Can we get that back?
I see that. I think Amy is having some internet problems, so I'm going to pull that up. Just give me just a second here.
Sounds good. If you can pull it up. If not, I have my outline here. We can charge ahead, and the only thing is the poor guys have to look at my face, because I have the face for radio. You can, if you just want to kill your video and listen to the audio, we'll call it radio for the day. No, don't do that. So, all right. Oh, hello, we're back. Thank you, Todd. All right. So we see this. This is not a new challenge. This is something that it really is in our DNA as those who are heirs of the Saxon immigration. And the reason we have this great opportunity is our message is indeed timeless and timely. We are centered in the gospel of Jesus Christ. We are, so this is the reason we exist. A Lutheran school does not exist to teach math. It exists to teach math. It exists to be a seminary, a seedbed for disciples who actually happen to be pretty good at math, except for me, but that's another story. But we understand that as we see this great opportunity for Lutheran education, we know that only the gospel can change hearts and lives. And that's what makes Lutheran schools different than any other educational institution. What's been interesting is over the last few years, we've had a couple of our staff members, as they have kids go off to college, they had the opportunity to go teach in the public sector, because of course the salary is a little higher there. And to an individual, every one of those individuals, within months of their departure, they come back and they were able to reiterate that while we at St. John have our issues, whether it's a limited budget or we have, but they understand that it's a different kind of setting. A Lutheran school is not public school light. It's a different kind of setting. And I firmly believe that it's a different kind of setting because we are centered in and around the gospel. Now, one of the things we have to do, and this is something I stress with my teachers, something we talked about in the in-service today, an individual teacher or an individual Lutheran school may not be able to change the world. We go back to the fact that we're not trying to create some sort of Lutheran Christian utopia. But what we can do, focused on the gospel of Jesus Christ, is make a difference in one child, one family, and then by an extension, have a change on the community. In fact, I was having a conversation today with one of our staff members whose college-age son is about the same age as my oldest, has kind of bought into a different kind of worldview. And as he described it to me, it really, I think it's the distinction. A more progressive worldview sees the forest, but doesn't see the individual trees. Whereas from our perspective of the gospel, as each one, as every one his witness, we deal this on an individual level. We may not be able to change the forest, but we can take care of the tree in front of us. And I think that's important for us to understand. When we, as Lutheran pastors leading schools, or Lutheran educators, Lutheran administrators leading schools, one of the most important things we understand is we're not there to teach math. We are teaching children, people for whom Christ died, individual saints redeemed by the blood of Christ. And we do that so that they can perform in the world, but more importantly, so that they can have that connection to that one who is the vine, that has redeemed them to indeed bear much fruit. Okay, and this is the corny cliche thing. I may not be able to save the world here from St. John, but if you remember the olden story, pastors, you've heard this illustration before of the old man walking on the beach, picking up starfish and throwing them back at low tide, and the younger man incredulously looking. There's thousands of starfish laying on this beach, and the incredulous young man who has a forest view says to the old man, "How are you going to make a difference? There are thousands of starfish on this beach." But as the old man reached down and picks it up and looks at the starfish, he says, "I can make a difference in this one," and throws it back in the ocean. And I think it's important for us to understand this great opportunity is not necessarily a macro opportunity as it is a micro opportunity. One individual at a time, being connected to Jesus Christ through the mission and ministry of a Lutheran school. Okay. Luther would. What happened there? I lost my Luther quote. That's okay. So let me just get. Sorry, guys. We'll put Luther on later. So, what are the challenges that come with? What are the challenges that come with being faithful in a Lutheran school? Well, obviously, it is a changing congregational culture. Congregations, for the most part, are indeed smaller than they used to be. Some of this is demographic. If you want some more information on that demographics, you can contact the Office of National Mission Stewardship. Heath Curtis and some of our researchers have done some great work on demography, where it is that we have done well, where it is that we're struggling. Some of that is just locational. Many of the areas where we have our Lutheran churches, and by extension the Lutheran schools, are in areas where population is much smaller than it once was. I understand that not everybody's like living in Sheboygan County. Understand, if you're Missouri Synod and you live in Sheboygan County, Wisconsin, you can't swing a dead cat without hitting a Missouri Synod Lutheran. There are 21 congregations, LCMS congregations in Sheboygan County alone. There are 11 in the city of Sheboygan. There are 4 Lutheran grade schools that if you could build a nice golf course between the 4 schools and it wouldn't be more than about 7,000 yards seemingly. But what's interesting is the makeup of our congregations are different. We're not as large as we once were. One time in our history, St. John was the largest church in South Wisconsin, over 3,000 members. Now we're down to about 2,000 members. At one point, and as you scale down the size of your congregation, there's also the chance that you're going to scale down the enrollment of your school. Back when we were 3,000 members, we also had 350 kids in our building. Now we're down to about 210. So as the culture of the setting and the culture of the congregation changes, so also does the setting and culture of the local Lutheran grade school. But of course, the other reality in the time, especially some of our legacy schools like ours, which has been here 150 years plus, some of the greatest stresses come from the stress on congregational budgets. The bottom line is we're paying our teachers and our pastors a lot more than we used to. Now, some of that is economy of scale when you figure, today's dollars versus 1950 dollars. But the reality is we are paying more. And we've had the exponential rise in benefits costs. And health insurance, we just went through this here at St. John as well, where on an annual, you never used to think about it. We only had health insurance. Well, now you got to worry about, okay, are we going to stay on the managed plan, or deductibles, employee support for premiums, and all of these other things that we're worrying about many more questions. We have a lot more stresses placed on the local congregation and its school ministry that look a lot more like small business than maybe what we would have recognized in parish ministry, say 20, 30 years ago. But here's another challenge, and this is one of the things, especially with buildings, with congregations with school, it's facilities maintenance. St. John built our sanctuary in 1890. It's a beautiful building. It has been well maintained, but it costs money. In addition, in our location, we have about a block and a half of downtown Plymouth under roof between church, school, gymnasium, and things like that. And it's not just the cost of putting them up. It's not just the cost of daily operation. It's also the ongoing cost of facilities maintenance. New boilers have to be put in, new roofs have to be put on, new windows have to be installed, and on and on. So these budgets, which are already stressed by smaller congregations, are then also stressed by the greater expenses of maintaining facilities. Okay, so and here's the question: if you are someone with a school, and I would like you to respond to this, so that Todd, you can maybe help me out with this. Of those who are listening, who are operating, who are pastoring or leading or involved in a congregation, do you know what percentage of each dollar that goes into your offering plate on Sunday morning or Saturday night or Monday night or Wednesday night, do you know what percentage goes to school operation? Have you done the arithmetic to figure that out? I would encourage you, if your answer is no, I would encourage you to seriously think about breaking that out. And I don't necessarily mean that so you can, we got to cut the school off or something. No, but part of this is you need to understand the scope of your ministry, of financing your ministry. Here at St. John, we have a $2.2 million budget. So, we're a large congregation with a large school. But the reality is, even at this point, we charge tuition. We are a voucher school, which means we receive about $250,000 to $260,000 a year from that. Okay, Chris, I understand. So be patient. But so even with tuition, all of these second and third source funding models, we still at St. John are putting 80 cents of every dollar that goes in the offering plate to maintain school ministry. And as a result of that, that creates great challenge. If you're, Andy, I saw your answer too. So this leads to a balancing act, and if you overweight the cost of the school, if you're at 80 cents on the dollar like we are, that presents a challenge to do other gospel ministry here in this place. However, if you have on the other side, if you have a more school support itself mentality of a lower percentage of each dollar, then it becomes much more difficult. You're often then dealing with larger tuitions, other third source funding challenges. So really, in all honesty, so that's the changing congregational culture. It's no longer the day. Very few, if any, of congregations I know have no tuition, where it's simply all supported out of the offering plate. I don't advocate for going back to that. What I advocate for is a sensible balance. You can't have too much school. You can't have not enough if you're going to be faithful in who you are and what you're doing. All right. So the other thing though that this changing congregational culture leads to is it leads to questions: what's the school for? Is it a mission? Is it a ministry? Or is it a golden calf? And we'll talk more about that third one a little bit later. In fact, I have a rather somewhat lengthy excursus on that we'll go through going forward here in a minute. Okay. So then we've got another challenge. Then is the challenge of the family culture. We have more dysfunction in our classrooms today than we did at any other point in my 15 years of school ministry as a pastor. And this is true even amongst our church families. Whether it's financial issues, whoever you talk to, whether it's Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University or any of the other financial planners will tell you that the vast number of our families that sit in our pews and by extension then go to our schools, these are folks who are living paycheck to paycheck. 60, 70, 80% of them are facing immense financial pressures, immense financial stresses. And sometimes it's self-inflicted because they're trying to have young families and the 2 new cars, a bigger house, a boat, a place up north, those kind of things. But it's not always that. It's not always that. Understand that the number one leading cause of financial stress in a family is medical bills, which is not necessarily a matter of overspending. But even with health insurance, it's possible for a catastrophic medical event or a very serious medical event to put some serious financial pressures on all of our on our families. Not to mention, as I said, like I said earlier, as I prepare to take my second child to college, there are pressures there as well. But even in the church families, we have divorce. The number of families in our Lutheran schools that are divorced, the dysfunctional, or an even growing aspect of never marrieds. So you see how the culture of our target audience, our families that we are serving, there's some stresses there. There's also, and then this I think is the biggest one. This is one that I really tried to wrestle with. It's the culture of having to overcome the need to hide our brokenness. We think that if we're in the pews every week, if we're receiving the Lord's Supper, we've got our 3 kids in Lutheran schools, that our life should be perfect. That we should never have a problem with substances. We should never have a problem with pornography or whatever. And what we end up, our marriage isn't as strong as it used to be, or we're not as close as we used to be, but we're going to make the public think we can. This whole concept of families appearing healthier than they really are. And that ends up being a denial of the gospel, because again, it's the gospel that makes whole. So we have, this is a spiritual dysfunction, if you will. It's refusal to publicly acknowledge our own brokenness. And then that's where we get some of the hypocrisy and things like that in our, and how we're perceived in the community. And then this puts a lot of pressure on Lutheran schools, as a result of the financial stresses, sometimes working multiple jobs, sometimes having to focus so much on so many things. Parents by a whole have become less and less involved in the educational process. It is very difficult, in my experience, to deal with, to have the same kind of quote unquote, back when when many of us were in school, we all had the room mothers. These were the ones who they put together all the parties and planned all of the events, and we just don't have that anymore. Some of that is a cultural change in the fact that both parents tend to be working. But even in families where one of the parents has more time, they're just not as involved. And really it ends up with we have fewer and fewer of the middle. We have extremes. We have on one side we have the helicopter parents, and these are the people who check their kids' school information. We have a program here at St. John called Sycamore. Whether it's Power School or whatever, they're on there 3 or 4 times a day to make sure little Johnny's getting his work done and getting an A. And then we have other parents who are functionally disengaged. And a lot of that comes, I think a lot of that comes, it's the consumerism aspect of now multiple generations of tuition. I pay tuition, therefore I want you to do, I need to get my money's worth. So on the hyperactive helicopter parent, on the hyperactive helicopter parent position, you're dealing with, I want to get I paid for that. I want to make sure you get an A. But by like token, you all on the other end of the spectrum, the disengaged parent, that consumerism says, hey, listen, I'm paying you to do this. Nobody would think of hiring someone to do their lawn and then going out and cutting their own grass. So that's kind of at times we have a rise in that sense of, hey, I paid for this service. You're going to deliver this service, like we'd be delivering a pizza or being an Uber driver or whatever. So we've had this changing culture of consumerism that has crept into our schools, and largely because people think, hey, I write a check every month or once a year or whatever, and that's a challenge for a ministry. There's also those who seek out Lutheran schools for less than spiritual reasons. Sometimes they're sought out because they've got smaller class sizes. I know our experience here in this setting and in my last parish, because we had smaller class sizes, what we ended up with was attracting more families who had kids who didn't necessarily qualify for additional academic assistance. Maybe that they weren't necessarily diagnosable as having a learning disability, but they needed more help. So a lot of times what's happening, because we don't have 30, 40 kids in a class or 25 or 28 kids in a class, we have smaller class sizes with the expectation that we're going to have more and more one-on-one time, which is true to one degree. But what happens is if you have a growing segment of kids, it starts to eat into the time that the teacher has to teach in the classroom. So that's a change in the academic family culture as well. So as a result, this whole thing comes in, with consumerism combined with that different milieu of student that we're kind of getting more and more of. We end up with a lot of fix my kid mentality, and that's anybody who thinks like that's never been in a classroom, and so that's a challenge that we face. We also have the changing challenge of technology. So there's no question that technology has impacted every Lutheran school, every school. Lutheran schools are not exempt from this. In fact, we were talking about some of our younger teachers were lamenting as they're starting to get student teachers. They're coming out of these schools and they have very little access to the new technologies, whether it's not really a new technology anymore, whether it's a smart board or using iPads and one-to-one computing and things like that. These pressures are not unique to any school, and certainly Lutheran schools are not exempt from them. There is, if every school in your community has one-to-one technology, meaning whether it's an iPad or a Chromebook or a laptop of some sort, it's going to be pretty hard for you as a school to compete with that. So therefore, and that expectation comes, and that presents even more stress on the Lutheran school, because this stuff is not, even with the disposable technology of the Chromebook, Google is, and their subsidiaries, whether it's Acer or whatever, they've cornered the market on the disposable web-based computer, but they're not free. So, like if you got 100 kids in your school, you've got 100 kids in your school, and each one of these machines is $200 a piece. Okay, you're dealing with a sizable chunk of money just on the front end. But you can't just have that. You need infrastructure to go with that. So if you're going to go to these web-based technologies, you have to turn around and make sure you got enough broadband access. So, and that's not getting cheaper. So you've got those. So you got the front end costs. You've got the front end costs of connecting the infrastructure, whether it's enough power for charging or enough broadband for a bunch of kids to be on simultaneously. But then there's also the continuing cost, the challenge. It's subscriptions. If you're, the old computer lab model, you still, you had to pay Microsoft $60 or $80 a year just to use their program. But there's all kinds of other subscriptions, whether it's applications that are not freeware, because they're a little more substantial than freeware and they do more of what you need them to do, but it costs money on an annual subscription basis. You also have maintenance, both in dollars, and that's a challenge. The problem is if you hand a Chromebook to a fifth grader, guess what? They're going to drop them. They're going to walk around with them open and crack the lid. Keys are going to come off. And these all have to be maintained and that's a challenge. They have to be maintained, but they're still disposable technology. So it's not cheap. You have to find that local vendor who's willing to work on them. And if not, you're going to have to find somebody, either a staff person, or you're going to have to pay somebody, a consultant, to come from the outside and do all that stuff. And again, we talked about financial stresses in the first section of the challenges. So these ongoing things, and then eventually the machines die, they're replacement. So you have all of these technological based challenges. Okay. Now, how do we meet all these challenges? Well, one of the things, and this is probably the single most influential non-theological book I've read in the last 10 years, is the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek. If you have not seen his TED Talk, if you have not read the book Start With Why, if you are an administrator of any stripe, I would really encourage you to read this. I put this in the hands of my teaching staff last year. It's even helpful. It's a business leadership book, okay? But its premise, I think, is very helpful. This whole concept of it addresses something that I've really dealt with in the area of Christian stewardship as well. When you start seeking solutions, when you start your journey to seek solutions to challenges in the wrong place, you will always end up in the wrong destination. Where I'm sitting right now, you go about 150 feet to my left, and you are at the front office door of the church. Now, if I were to give you directions and say, turn left 4 blocks, turn left and go 4 blocks. At that intersection, turn left one more time, go 1 block. When you get to the end of that block, turn left and go 3 blocks, turn left again, and you go 150 feet, and you'll be at my front door, and my wife will meet you there with a glass of cold lemonade. Okay? If you follow those directions to the T, and you follow them earnestly, you could get to my house. But that's only true if you follow those directions from the right starting point. If I put you over the other side of my campus, and you follow those exact same directions, left, and the number of blocks. If you follow those exact same directions, you will end up about 250 feet from the entrance to the seediest bar in Plymouth. Okay? Now, if you end up there, you get to buy me a cold beer rather than my wife giving you cold lemonade. But the point of the illustration is this. If you start in the wrong place, you will end up in the wrong destination. If you start, and this is Sinek's point, and this is my point in the area of stewardship, if you start with how or what, it reduces our ministry simply to a process. So if you sit down and you evaluate as a pastor or a leader in a congregation, if you simply address the how are we doing school ministry, or what is it that we're doing in our school ministry, if you begin your conversations there, you are starting in the wrong place. Okay? You will end up with process-driven answers. Okay? And so what I'm putting forward is, when you evaluate your ministry, especially your school ministry, you need to start with why. Why is it that we do this? Why does St. John invest 80 cents on every dollar that comes in the offering plate? Why is that important to us? Well, and that goes to the core of our gospel ministry. It's our identity. This is who God has called us to be in this place. So we ask the question, why? Why do we have a Lutheran school? Why is it important that we have a distinctly Lutheran identity in this place, as opposed to St. John the Baptist Catholic or Faith Baptist or some of the other schools? When you start with who you are and who you've been made to be, you end up in a much different place than if you're simply talking about process. Okay, so meeting the challenge, starting with why. You go to values first. You go to values first, and that's important. See, in many aspects of our ministry, we try to be who we're not. We try to be who we're not called to be. Whether it's I'm going to start this new kind of this new kind of worship style, so that it attracts younger families. this is the whole concept of attractional ministry. We're going to do something different with the intent of baiting and switching somebody into our congregation. So you start with your values. Who is it that, why are we here, and what is it that God has called us to? Okay. And many of our congregations with schools, education has always been the core of teaching the faith to the next generation. St. John has been in that situation for over 150 years, almost 160 now. It's the core to who we are in this place. And generation after generation has done that. I believe right now, I think we have some of our 3Kers who are the 7th generation in this congregation. 7. That's pretty impressive, right? But the next step, when you start with why, you go to vision. You know where you're going. Okay. Being a city kid, growing up just outside of St. Louis, God had his great sense of humor. He sent me to Wisconsin to serve amongst dairy farmers. That was my first 7 years in ministry. I served in areas where there were more Holsteins than there were people. But it was amazing what you learned there. The first time you ride along with the farmer when he's planting the corn, and he teaches you when he teaches you, how do you get a straight furrow when you're trying to plant corn? Well, he talks about that vision, that point on the horizon. And you focus in on that. Well, now of course they do it with GPS. But the old boys who were able to plow straight furrows, they did it because they were able to identify and lock in where it was they needed to go, and that comes from knowing the area that we serve. Okay, we need to be looking out, not in. So often in our school ministries, we look for our enrollment only within our pews, and we'll have a discussion of that in a little bit. But are there people in the shadow of your steeple, and the shadow of your school building, that need the gospel? Yeah. See, so this vision of starting with why, it sets us on the horizon. It's not our navel. It's not our own balance sheet. It's who is it that God's called us to reach with the gospel. And then it also then leads us to a discussion of mission. That's having a target we can hit. So often, most every congregation has some sort of a mission statement. More often than not, it's aspirational. It's what we wish we could be if everything were perfect, not an actual thing. But for us, when you start with why, when you start with who it is that God has called you to be, it affords you the opportunity to identify with values and vision that target that's an actual target, not an aspirational target. Like at St. John, our mission is not to have 500. It's not a realistic mission for us to have 500 kids in our school. It's not a realistic mission. Why? Because A, we don't have the physical plan for it, but B, the community doesn't have that kind of base of families anymore. Okay. Now a mission though too is laser focused. And when I talk about this is talking about from the congregational level. Understand, school is part of the ministry of the school, or of the school is part of the ministry of the congregation. And when you have a mission that is laser focused as a congregation, that prevents you from slipping into this area of the golden calf ministry that we're going to talk about here for a few minutes. So what is golden calf ministry? And of all the things that a congregation does, probably other than a parish cemetery, the school is of the greatest risk of becoming golden calfish. Okay, a golden calf ministry, that is a ministry that people see as their identity, which is not connected directly to the gospel. Okay, but what I mean by that is it gives a lip service. Oh yeah, we talk about Jesus, but really it's about the school. Okay, and schools can take this on simply because of the tradition of generation after generation after generation. When you sit here and you got great and great great grandchildren sitting in being taught in an educational ministry that has been in place since the late 1800s. Okay, so you see, it's very easy. Well, this has always been part of our family, and therefore we have always done this. Okay, so when we say this, we've always done this. We've always had a St. John's. For anybody's memory, has always had a school. The only year we didn't have school was 1919, and that was because of an influenza outbreak. The state closed all the schools. They just closed. The kids had a year off. Okay, but here's what happens. When a ministry that we've always had becomes a golden calf, what we find out is that institutional survival becomes the key. It's no longer, is this why God has us here? It's, we have to keep this ministry going because it's always been here. We've always done this. Now, understand, history is not always bad. It is good to have a longevity in a place doing a certain ministry. But when you become so focused on preserving the institution rather than having the institution serve the gospel, then you've really elevated a ministry to a golden calf. Okay? Now, the other aspect of this is we've always done it this way. And this is one of the things where we insist on doing ministry a certain way, and this happens a lot with golden calf ministries. Now, what we have to embrace is the fact that in every walk of life, methods have changed and dropped out of favor over the years. Okay, so the bottom line is, I know Andy Smith. Andy, you know darn good and well that a lot of the things that we do in school today, that we teach in the schools that we lead today, they didn't do in our day. And that's not just technology. And so we've changed this. So methods have changed. And if the golden calf insists on doing things the same way all the time, we have changes in technology. I remember when Columbus School, I went to a public school for grade school. I remember when we got our first computer, a TRS 880 from Radio Shack. And the only thing we knew how to do was write a basic program and run a loop. Okay, it was my cell phone has 10 times the computing power that thing did. So technology's changes. But if a golden calf ministry insists that we must do it the same way all the time. The other thing that a golden calf ministry is, it's not responding. It doesn't respond to the changes in our community. Many of our communities, while the population hasn't changed, how it's made up has changed. Sheboygan, the city of Sheboygan is a classic example, or even our own Sheboygan County is a classic example. The population has not really changed over the last 50 years, but how it's made up has. We recently, within the last 5 years, we got involved in a demographic study and found out that of Sheboygan County, a full 10% of the population was Hispanic and spoke Spanish. 10%. It got around. It's a community of 8,000 to 10,000 people, and there were no one serving them. So we got involved. Knowing that target community led us to get involved with a Hispanic church plant. But the golden calf. If you're involved in a golden calf ministry, you don't even give a second thought to what's going on in your community, and as a result, history is not always good. When the golden calf begins to insist that we have always done school ministry this way, this has always been our target audience. It becomes worship of the school rather than service in the gospel, and that's something that we need to address. Golden calves have to be destroyed. You read Exodus 32, and it just did not come out well. Okay. Now understand what I mean. It's the golden calf ministry mentality that has to be dealt with. I'm not saying, please understand, I'm not saying that if you have allowed your school, if the culture of your congregation has caused your school to become a golden calf, I'm not saying you have to close it. What I am saying is you've got work to do to redefine values, vision, and mission. You need to redefine it. It needs to be, you need to look at your ministry. And it does mean you're probably going to have a different focus. It does mean you're going to have a different target audience. It means things are going to change. Problematic, but things must change. Sometimes that change is easier to embrace than others. This is where institutional racism comes in. I don't want them in our school, or I don't want them in our church. But the reality is, everyone with flesh and blood is someone for whom Christ died, even if they live in poverty and many other dysfunctions. Okay? So that golden calf ministry is something that you have to work at dismantling. Okay, so then it leads to the next question. If the school is a golden calf ministry, is it a mission? I don't know how many times in the 15 years I've served these two congregations, and I've talked to so many others on stewardship trips, when they ask, what is the mission? What's your involvement in mission? And they all turn around almost to a fault. They turn around and say, well, our school is our mission. So that means it's an outreach to the community. How's that working? How's that working? Are you, how many baptisms have you done? Are there new active families who are disciples of Jesus in your congregation because of your school ministry? Now, I'm not talking about having to compromise our doctrine or our practice, but what I'm saying is assess how's it doing. If you say you are a mission, are you reaching your target? Here's the question. A school that is a mission very often has no distinction between members and non-members. Okay? Congregations, the recent trend among congregations that really want to embrace this kind of a mission, school as mission, what they've done is, believe it or not, they don't charge tiered tuition. They set a tuition somewhere in the middle between non-member and member. We're in the process of transitioning to that here at St. John over the course of a 3-year period, just for our budgeting purposes. But what's happening is, we just simply have tuition. We simply have tuition, which then doesn't afford the opportunity for somebody who just simply takes the new member class because they want to pay $1,750 instead of $3,050. And so then if we do that, or better yet, here's a wild out of the box thought. If your school's really a mission, maybe you shouldn't charge tuition to non-members and have your members carry the freight for those who need to know Jesus. Boy, is that a radical thought. A golden calf ministry would say, no, that can't happen. I think if it's a school that's really a mission, it's something that might be worth considering. Now, is this, when you consider your golden calf, is the school a ministry? Now, that's different than that's different than mission. A school as ministry targets the congregation, and it sees itself primarily. This is one of the things that we have done here at St. John. We've adopted the school as ministry mentality. It really becomes a seminary for future disciples. We are seeking to put the scriptures and confessions into the hands of our kids at the earliest possible ages and model for them what it's like to be part of the body of Christ, part of the family of Christ. And as a result of that, our goal, our mission, is to have more and more families that are active in all aspects of our congregational ministry, not just the school. Because it's very easy for families to become very active in school. You've got, at the very early ages, the kids are singing. The preschoolers sing in church. That's always one of our largest attendance weekends, apart from Easter and Christmas. It's when we have the preschool sing. Why? Because everybody's grandma and grandpa wants to come see little Johnny sing. Okay, but is that really activity in ministry? Whether it's connecting them with Bible studies or getting them into worship, Sunday school, those kind of things. So a school as a ministry that's not a golden calf sees the end game getting more and more people into a discipleship walk with in the entirety of their lives with the congregation and ultimately then with Jesus. Okay, so the congregation we must be who God has called us to be as a congregation. Okay, and that is a community centered around font, altar, and pulpit. Okay, So a school ministry, a school that is a ministry, or even a mission, that all flows from the chancel. It starts in the chancel. Word and sacrament is core to this, not a side activity. And that's what makes Lutheran education, that's what makes Lutheran schools that are properly grounded distinctly Lutheran. Anything that lacks this, if a school ministry lacks a clear connection to font, altar, and pulpit, if it lacks a clear connection to word and sacrament ministry, there's a good chance that it's a golden calf. And I can tell you, ultimately, it's probably not Lutheran. But that can be reclaimed. Repentance, revisioning, and relooking at what God has called the individual congregation to be. So, how do we meet these challenges? Well, the first, of course, is the financial challenge. Financial challenges are real. While total, this is one of the things we learned, total giving, dollar for dollar giving is up. So, in many cases, total expenses have skyrocketed over the last 3 decades. Just look at your pastors' salaries, and especially teacher salaries. The sad reality is many of our rural, small parochial schools survived because they paid their teachers very little. Or worse, they paid them on a tier. The called teacher was the principal, and he got paid one level, and then the other workers, the other teachers, oftentimes wives of people who had other jobs, were paid next to nothing for full-time labor. And that is, and as that has now been identified as a real discrimination, as a real challenge to ministry, that's why many of our smaller schools are facing the great challenges there, because they're now paying not a prevailing wage, but the workers worth their hire. The workers worth their hire. And as a result of this, better corporate stewardship is flat out demanded. The reality is you cannot ask Grandma Schmidt to give more money to support a ministry if you're wheedling away the dollars that she's already putting in the offering plate. It's just not. Okay, understand. We do stewardship so often. When we come into a congregation or when we're asked to talk about stewardship, we're almost fundamentally or almost exclusively asked to talk about individual stewardship, the Meador family, the Smith family, the Kohlbaum family. But we forget at times that faithful corporate stewardship also spurs on individuals and family stewardship. If those who are set apart to lead a congregational ministry, especially those involving schools, when you're dealing with larger and larger budgets, it is an absolute necessity that your corporate stewardship is sound. That means you're doing good things with that which you are entrusted with. So you can't willy-nilly run up excessive debt, which is really the case here at St. John. We had a unique situation. 9 years ago when I arrived, we had $1.4 million in debt, and we passed our 6th consecutive budget that was $160,000 upside down. And we had, I realized that was not a sustainable financial model. And really, in all honesty, had we continued on that track, my guess is the school would have had less than 5 years to survive. But as a result, we had to get serious about how to do this. It meant we didn't just cut. We analyzed the whole ministry, and we realized that we needed to make some prunes, cuts that intended to allow for growth. And in that time, our budget got smaller, got more real. Our staff got smaller, got more aggressive, but over the years we've been able then to grow it back, because as we have become much more faithful corporate stewards, we also then become our individuals are more willing to be generous individual stewards. Okay, how not to face the challenges? Don't balance the budgets on the back of your workers. Hey, we're back. Hi, guys. The worker is worth his or her hire. You can't be cutting off your staff. Okay? It disrespects those who are answering God's call to ministry. And don't cut corners. Don't hire less expensive staff who don't get the ministry. And again, don't try and be public school light. That's important. Explore congregational partnerships. This is how you meet this with other congregations in your area that don't have schools, or maybe others that do. I think this is ongoing. Maybe you need to find others that do have schools to find ways to partner. Maybe like we have two congregations, so as we're not getting rid of stealing all their young families, that we have partnerships where they help support our ministry and their family gets member tuition. The other thing is consolidation. It's not a bad word. In fact, duplicated efforts are sinful stewardship. So if you have 3 or 4 schools in your region that are all struggling, but none of you are willing to partner, that's a clear sign of golden calf ministry. Explore public and private partnerships. Sometimes there's a great program in Milwaukee that a lot of the Wisconsin schools are doing. I didn't have enough time. I didn't have enough opportunity to get actual context on this, but I will explain. If you want more information, send me a private message. What they do is a wraparound program, either with a public or more likely with a charter school, where the charter school operates the day-to-day operations. They teach math, they teach science and reading and such, but the congregation has a wraparound, a before and after school faith formation program. Now, this is not like volunteer Sunday school. This is staffed with people who understand and are committed to ministry. It's a unique model. It's outside the box, but it does, instead of having to staff with 10 or 12 workers, now you're having a much smaller staff of 3 or 4, and they've had some success, especially in an urban setting. I wonder, and I think it would work in a more rural setting as well. So, to meet the challenge, you have to honestly assess the future. You have to ask the question, should our school continue? I don't know the answer to that. You do. Are there families to serve? Are there enough resources to do school ministry well? There's nothing worse than trying to do school on the cheap. Are there other options, like wraparounds, like partnerships, like consolidations? Is the gospel ministry harmed by the school remaining open? That's a hard question, because understand, schools should support congregational ministry, not hamstring it. If we're investing everything in debt into operating a school that is not being run well, that's not faithful corporate stewardship, it's getting in the way of other opportunities for gospel ministry. Now, understand, closing a school is not failure. God simply just has another plan for your congregation. Remember, the scripture says the gates of hell will not prevail against the church, but that is not a defensive posture. The congregation is called to be on the offensive with the gospel. So it's important to understand that the Lord may be leading some of these local congregations to a different kind of ministry. Now, it will change the ministry, but a different kind of ministry. So what role does the pastor play in? Wait, hold on, let me go back. I think I skipped one. What's the pastor's role? Pastors, you got to be all in. You got to be all in with the school being a core of your ministry. You can't. I cannot not support the school when 80% of my budget is meant to the school. And pastors, if your heart's not in it, it might be time for you to have a conversation with your DP. Seriously. And I don't mean that in a bad way. There are brothers who are equipped and ready to do this. Maybe it's time to talk to your DP about your future. Because a not all in pastor will not be able to lead the congregation and its schools through changing times. Because what's going to happen is you're going to end up with fractions and friction. These things will either develop or more likely worsen. You'll have the us versus them, school versus church. And you know what? That's just not confessional. That's not biblical. You also have to be on the same page with your principal and your staff. You have to be able to speak as one voice. And if you're not all in, you can't speak as one voice. You can't pontificate from on high if you're not going to be right there in the trenches with them. Pastors, you got to be realistic. For the congregation's sake, keeping us focused on the who we are and what we're called to do. And if a school ministry is part of that, that's a focus. You need to go to families and look at them in the eye and lovingly say, your kid should be in our school. If it's a financial issue, we'll find a way to make it work. You also need to be all in and have a realistic goal for the workers' sake. Because the staff that we labor with, they've got families too. They've got kids who are going to college and mortgages to pay and things like that. We need to be good stewards of our colleagues in ministry. And we also need to the pastor needs to be realistic for Christ's sake. And that's not an expletive. That it's true. It's keeping the congregation's focus on first things first, which is the gospel. It's not about budgets. It's not about enrollment. It's always about the gospel first. Okay. You have to be willing to seek outside counsel. Talk to your district. You've got education execs and others for best practices in schools. Strategic planning. For many of us, that this sounds, well, this is not the gospel. Well, guess what? The scriptures talk about considering the cost. If you're going to, talk about the guy who wants to build a tower, he sits down and counts the cost, see if you got enough money to finish it. That's the same way. Strategic planning is a tool. And sometimes it's helpful when the pastor isn't the one leading it, but that he reaches out and helps identify the right person. You also have the ability. Sorry, guys, my wife is calling. I'll call her back. NLSA is huge. Yes, it is a price tag, but NLSA has a role. It helps you in self-assessment. It helps you ask hard questions about yourself, and it introduces you to best practices. It's worth the expense. I've been through it twice. It's worth the expense and effort because it enables you to focus on what you're going to do. Encourage your staff and your principals, though, too, to collaborate with other schools. Find out what other people are doing in your setting. If you're a school of 50, it's probably not a good idea to go to a school of 500. But find others who are doing things really well, and go learn from them. Just like you would know a pastor, just like a brother pastor who's really a good preacher. You want to read his preaching, or he's really good in pastoral care. You might pick his brain on what it's like to be better in pastoral care. Our teachers should be encouraged to do the same. As pastors, we need to be leading and encouraging them to do that. But again, keep the gospel, keep the main thing the main thing. Again, distinctively Lutheran. Okay, Lutheran in our theology. It's on our front door. We shouldn't compromise it just in order to fill our seats. We need to be distinctly Lutheran in our practice, worship, theology, how we teach religion, and our staff. Okay, the temptation is to think that teachers are teachers. But Lutheran educators, when they're properly formed, they're different. I don't mean that to be offensive to anybody, but I've been doing this long enough. Somebody who was nurtured in the Lutheran system, they're different kind of educators. Okay, now some more on staffing. Call synodically trained staff when possible. Now I realize they're short. There's a shortage of them. We're fighting on them. But understand, these are people who have made sacrifices to serve the gospel. And again, they were formed in a different culture. Now, if it's absolutely not a possibility, you want to get somebody who is willing and able, and you should fund it for them to go through colloquy. Because, it helps. The colloquy program will not make a bad teacher a good teacher. It will make a good teacher a better teacher. If you have somebody in your congregation who is publicly trained, and the colloquy is a good thing. It's a good thing. And understand then too, that this is not just for the pastors. Pastors, you need to encourage that we need teachers who are all in ministry as well. That means they're not just going to punch the clock and be in our classrooms. They're going to be in worship on Sunday morning. They're going to be in Bible study. They're really going to be partners in ministry. Now go back to some of the challenges we faced on salaries. It's pretty hard to be a partner in a ministry if we treat them like second-class citizens, financially, professionally. If we really want them to be, we need to honor them as partners if we're going to expect them to be partners. That's a big thing, and that's stewardship of our people. All right, understand the goal of a school is always to be making disciples. Now we understand, third article of the Creed, that's the work of the Holy Spirit. And it happens through word and sacrament ministry. That's our goal. If our goal of a school is to produce valedictorians at the local high school, we're a good private school. We're not a Lutheran school. Our goal in a school is to make disciples, to prepare them to be a valedictorian who also knows Jesus. And that's done through the word as it's proclaimed, word and sacrament ministry. Pastor, be a pastor. You're not the principal. You're not the CEO. And understand, the goal is not to be liked, but it's to be faithful. We wouldn't think twice of speaking and being faithful in the pulpit. We wouldn't think twice about being faithful in our classroom teaching. We also need to be faithful in our leadership. That means we need to say the right thing the right way at the right times. Okay? And understand, Jesus, must increase. The pastor must decrease. If it's simply about what we want, we're running afoul. Being a pastor in a school setting requires leadership and humility. Sometimes those things, because of our sinful nature, are mutually exclusive. And that's where our own confession and need for repentance comes in. Okay. Schools can be a key ministry in a congregation's call to be a community of the gospel. It's not the only way. There was a time when every Lutheran school, every Lutheran church had a school. Well, because of that, we need to get back to it. But understand that Christian education is an opportunity that must seriously be addressed seriously and accurately. There's no magic bullets in this. It's just a matter of asking hard questions without prejudged answers. Here's Luther. Above all, the most important and most usual teaching in both university and lower schools ought to be concerned with the Holy Scriptures. Oh, how unwisely we deal with our poor young folk who we are commanded to train and instruct. But we shall have to give a serious account for our stewardship and explain why we have not set the Word of God before them. We fail to notice the present pitiful distress of our young people. Though they live in the midst of a Christian world, they faint and perish in misery because they lack the gospel in which we should be training them. A school can do this. A school can do this. And again, Luther, when schools flourish, all flourish. So, sorry I went a little long. Got a little long-winded. I apologize. But we'll take any questions that you have now.
Not a problem that we went long. That's great. Fantastic stuff. Nathan, I had a bunch of notes that I wrote down, and you answered every single one of my questions. I really appreciated the golden calf illustration and the fact that you laid it out in such a great way, the difference between mission ministry and that golden calf idea. So
I lost
know
it. Todd,
you dropped out a little bit. I'm just singing your praises, so don't worry about it. It's all good. No, I was just saying that you answered all my questions that I scribbled down as we were going through. So fantastic. And I know, Nathan, you are available. If any of these guys have any questions down the line, or anybody that watches this on the recording, please don't hesitate to get a hold of our office or Nathan directly. And I know he would be more than happy to give you a hand and talk to you more further. So with that being said, we are, wait a second. I work with two preschools at my dual parish and struggle with how to properly minister to both preschools when I'm physically not in the building half the day. Any suggestions?
Yeah, be as present as you can be, and be intentional. And just like you might have the need to set office hours. Be very, you may want to have preschool hours where, or maybe it's a situation where you can work with your preschool teachers and say, hey, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I'm in this location. Can I come in and, be part of Jesus time? Or, physical presence is gigantic. It's when the pastor walks the halls and is in the classroom reading Bible stories, or just high-fiving kids at recess. Those are any kind of physical, visible presence. It doesn't require hours. But if they know who you are, and you happen to be walking through and little Billy's crying, you can sit, and they can be comfortable enough with you where you can sit down on the bench next to him and say, "Hey, what's going on, Billy? How can I help you?" It's not about massive quantities. It's about the fact that they know you're there. And so you be as present as you can be. That's a great question, though.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and I appreciate the intentionality aspect of that. If when we're intentional, then we don't just let it slip by and all of a sudden it's been months since I've been in the preschool, but I
Exactly.
intentionally set that aside. Same thing can happen in any aspect of our visitation or anything like that, our own personal devotion. So yeah, get
Yep.
there as much as you can and make those relationships. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So folks, you saw the message from Amy. Our national conference is coming up November 8th through the 10th in Kansas City under the topic or the theme "Have No Fear." We'd love to have you there with us, so go ahead and get on and register for that. We've got several webinars and a couple of engaging your community events coming up throughout the country, so get on our website and check that out. But we are going to say goodbye for today. Again, thank you so much, Pastor Meador, for your information and for your time and effort, and most of all for your passion for the ministry to these young people in Plymouth, Wisconsin. So good for you, and God's blessings to all of you. We pray for your ministries, and if you ever need anything, do not hesitate to contact us. Bye.